Josh came up to me earlier in worship just a little bit ago, and he said, Mom, I think you're supposed to share something. And I'm like, I don't have anything to share. And at the time, I didn't. And then as we were worshiping some more, the Lord gave me a picture of the Israelites before they crossed the Red Sea and with Moses. And kind of goes hand in hand with what Melody was saying and with what Jim was saying, about not going back. And the Egyptians were faced with the Israelites were faced with the Egyptians behind them and the sea in front of them. And Moses told them before they crossed it, Moses told the people, this is Exodus 14, starting at verse 13, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. And then the Lord says, in verse 15, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Isn't that what Melody said, to get moving, to keep going forward? Pick up your staff, raise your hand over the sea, divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground. And it talked about how he will harden the Egyptians in the heart of the Pharaoh. But I want you to catch this. After he said this, he said that his glory was going to be displayed through them. All Egypt will see my glory and know that I'm the Lord. And then right after that, in verse 19, the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud, which was the representation of God, also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and the Israelite camps. It was right between them. There was nothing the Egyptians could do to the Israelites because God's presence was between them. They had to go through the cloud, which was God's presence, before they could reach the Israelites. So what is it that you are facing that's behind you, or something that is coming after you? Don't you think that God's presence is going to come between that if you're a follower of Christ? As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire. It just wasn't a cloud, it was fire. It was consuming fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and the Israelites did not approach each other all night. They weren't going to get to the Israelites. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on each side. So they crossed over. Don't you think it would have been a hard thing to walk through these walls of water, thinking, is it going to stay? Is it going to crash over us? If I take this step of faith, is it going to keep up? Is God going to do what he said he was going to do? We all face those what ifs. What if I take this step of faith and it doesn't stand? What if I walk in this area that God says to do, but it doesn't hold? That's where trust and faith comes in. We don't know the outcome, but God does. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. What is that thing that is chasing you that God wants to throw into total confusion if you trust in him? He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of there. Away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted, the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. They recognized it was God. These ones who didn't trust in God recognized that it was God who was fighting for them. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again. An act of obedience. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers. So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. What is it that is coming against you? God can make it no more. God can cover it so that it's no longer an issue for you. It's hard to take that first step of faith. It's hard to do those hard things that God calls us to do. But it's God who fights the battle. And it's God who is going to have the victory. If you trust and have faith in that, you're going to take that step of faith and say, okay, God, I don't know how you're going to work this out. I don't know how you're going to crush the enemy, but I know that you will. So I want to encourage you. Right now, I'm praying for my children. There's intense battle for our kids. But I can trust God with my children, that He is faithful, that He is faithful to keep my kids. As long as I'm staying close and being obedient to what God has called me to and how to parent my children, that He's going to fight the battles for them and for me. Do the hard things. Do the hard step of faith.